All right, guys. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I hope the weather's nice wherever you're at. Sure isn't up here in New England. I understand Obama today issued sections of New England as national disaster areas. The flooding is already starting in some areas, and it's going to continue to do this up until at least Friday. Friday's supposed to be the next non-rain day that we have, so I'm sure the bankster boys are rubbing their hands together with glee as the billions of federal dollars pour in, and they reap tremendous profits. Unbelievable. Anyway, and this is on top of flooding that we already had, like, a week and a half ago? We had like 4 or 5 days straight. Not to mention last year. Oh, this is deja vu. Last June, this past June, it rained like 6 weeks straight. The whole month of June, literally, non-stop, every single day. I forgot what color the sky was. It rained the whole month of June and 2 weeks into July. It was just phenomenal. This is not normal weather. Anyway, I got a good show lined up for you today. I'm going to pick up with part 2 of what I started yesterday, talking about the Virginia Tech shootings. And really, you know, this needs to be viewed in light of what I discussed last week about Columbine. Once you see this pattern, folks, there's just no question what we're dealing with here. Columbine was a complete fraud. We were lied to about everything that happened there. It was a total psyops. And when you see the pattern at Virginia Tech, the same exact pattern, lo and behold, it's just business as usual. And that's been the case with a great many other school shootings, not only around this country, but in fact around the world. There was one in Scotland a few years back. Canada has had their share. And some people say, oh, that's the copycat syndrome. Well, yeah, it is. All the intelligence agencies around the world come out of the woodwork and say, hey, it's working great for them. Let's try it over here, too. You know, the same thing with the fake terror attacks, the fake terror alerts. Remember, what was his name? John Howard, former Australian Prime Minister, saw how well the fake orange alerts were working over here. He pulled the same thing over there in Australia. I think it was November of 2004 or 2005. I forget what year it was now, but there was a sleazy piece of so-called anti-terror legislation that Pretty Boy Howard was trying to get passed through Parliament. It wasn't flying. So, surprise of all surprises, the next day the little scoundrel issues a terror alert. And, of course, in wake of the terror alert, Parliament voted the piece of legislation in. And then later when asked, what's this orange alert, or not orange alert, but, terror alert, what's this terror alert based upon? And he says, oh, I can't go into the details. It's a matter of national security. But don't worry, it's from highly credible sources. Unbelievable. So, it's a copycat syndrome. They did the same thing here, folks. Steering us with phony orange alerts, and exploiting them to the hilt. All right, guys, short break. Stick with us. We'll be right back talking about the Virginia Tech fraudulent PSYOP shootings. Smoke in the hallways. The CIA's at it again. Virginia Tech, guys, another flippin' fraud. It's not a question of which tragic events have government fingerprints on them. It's a question of which ones don't have government fingerprints on them. In fact, I have a list here of all the major travesties that have occurred in this country's history that have not had the government's fingerprints on them. You want to hear it? Here it is. And that's it. I hope you wrote that down. Those are all of the instances tragic instances that have occurred that didn't have government fingerprints on them. Anyway, before I launch into that, I just wanted to mention I'm going to be talking about Virginia Tech Part 2, the first hour. That should be enough time to finish up these notes. And then the second hour, I'm going to be having a guest if the moon is lined up with Venus and Sagittarius. You just never know. I'm assuming my guest is going to show up. but who knows? No, he's a pretty, he's a respectable guy. If he doesn't, it's because something major came up. It's William Pepper. Those of you that aren't familiar with him, he's an interesting individual. He's had some, he's written some great books, had some interesting experiences. He serves currently as Sirhan's lawyer, the alleged, and I do mean alleged, assassin of RFK. He's written a book on the assassination of Martin Luther King, implicating, of course, the FBI, the CIA, in that hit. He's currently involved in an investigation, or should I say, efforts of a prosecution of George W. and his criminal cabal being launched out of Spain. He's involved in that. We're going to be talking about those and other issues. Who knows where that conversation will lead, but it'll be interesting. So I'm anticipating he's going to be calling in the second hour. Really nice guy, though. I've interviewed him before. There's some interesting information. Anyway, but now let's pick up with part 2 of yesterday's discussion. Yesterday I kind of laid the groundwork. Already dropped some hints of stuff I was going to be covering today, but basically what I covered yesterday was just pretty much the official story, what we were told about what happened, which already doesn't add up. We had Cho, shooting a couple kids in a dorm early in the morning, and then, a couple hours go by, and then he goes into part 2 of his shooting spree. During that 2-hour interval, we're told that, he filmed himself, took some pictures of himself, and then he mailed them to NBC News to be aired later. And all this time, nothing was done to stop him. It's just unbelievable. It's the same thing with Columbine, of course. We had Klebold and Harris, the only 2 shooters, whatever, going on for hours on end. In that case, the shooting continued long after the time, several hours after the time, according to the official story, that Klebold and Harris had shot themselves. Now, how's that possible? Boy, you talk about coming back from the dead. These ghosts were able to still fire their guns, I guess. That's amazing. Wow. But anyway, you got to wonder, just on that basis alone, how is this official story possible? How are we supposed to believe it when the shootings go on for hours on end? How was he able, Cho, how was he able to do this? And how were Klebold and Harris able to do what they did? Even if they weren't, supposedly shot at 12:10 and the shootings went on until almost 4 o'clock that afternoon, even if they were still alive all that time, how could they have pulled it off without police intervention? It's just incredible. SWAT teams swarming the place. But as it turns out, that's not the only problem. There are many, many, many more problems with the official story, both of Columbine and Virginia Tech. But again, we already looked at the Columbine thing last week. Now we want to look at some more of these problems with Virginia Tech. But already I hope you can see, based on what I said yesterday, that it's just not possible. But with the evidence we're going to be looking at now, I think you're going to agree with me that Cho either didn't do any of the shootings, or he was not the only perpetrator of, of this travesty. There were others involved. But I have good reason to believe, folks, that he wasn't even involved at all. He was set up as the patsy, and actually had nothing to do with it. But his profile fit the bill. He had a history of psychological problems, so he seemed like the perfect person to set up as the perpetrator. Anyway, let's look at some other problems with this official bunk story. In order to shoot so many shots accurately with both guns in his hands, Cho would have to have been a professional shooter, folks. He would have to be. Yet Cho never had any training for such accurate shooting ever his entire life. 23-year life. It's difficult to fire even one gun with accuracy in such rapid succession. Cho had only bought his guns a month before the spree. So how did he pull this off? By the way, several people who knew Cho said that he bought the guns for somebody else, didn't even buy them for himself. There's all kinds of problems, regarding the purchase of the guns, and anyways, get into that later. But how does someone with no training, apparently never even shot a gun before, in just one month's time, how does he develop these skills now, these shooting skills, where he can accurately point, aim, and shoot two guns at once? It's hard, to do that with even one gun in rapid succession. Boom, 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 boom. The shots are being fired, back to back. But think about it. There are 10 to 15 rounds in a pistol, and there were 32 deaths with 3 shots in most of the victims. 3 shots each. So we're dealing with almost 100 shots being fired, and those are the ones that actually hit victims. But, these were accurate shots being fired. Most of them did hit the victims. 3 bullets each for most of the victims. That's quite a record. With a pistol in each hand, it's very difficult to reload. And yet, as it turns out, shots were constantly being fired while he had guns in each hand. How was he able to reload these guns so quickly and fire the guns so accurately, again, with one gun in each hand? Nobody stops to think about this stuff. It's like 9/11. Nobody stops to think, well, wait a minute, how is it possible to fly around for a total of almost 2 hours in 4 airplanes, head toward Washington for 40 minutes without an intercept or a shoot down after the 2 towers in New York had been hit? Nobody stops to think about this stuff. Is it even possible? And you realize these pilots didn't even have training. The hijacker pilots didn't have good training. Their own instructors said they were horrible pilots. Anyway, guys, short break. We'll be right back. All right, guys. Welcome back. Looking at bizarre inconsistencies with the official story of the Virginia Tech shooting, just as there was with the Columbine shooting. Emily Hilscher was said to be Cho's girlfriend. This is another part of the official story that just doesn't pan out. This was absolutely not true. In fact, Emily was not related to Cho in any way, and yet he made it a point to go to her dormitory and kill her, and nobody knows why. Why did he go out of his way? She had no contact with him, no relationship with him at all. Why did he go out of his way just to target her? Another 1 or 2, I think, died in the process, but it was her that he primarily had gone after. There's just a lot of things that don't add up here. Cho's body had 2 shots in the chest, I mentioned this yesterday, and 1 in the back of the head. Does this sound like a suicide? Does it sound like he killed himself? Interestingly, most of the victims who were killed that day, as I stated, were also shot 3 times, just like Cho. It doesn't add up, folks. This sounds like somebody else doing the shootings who did have training, who did have, good shooting skills so that he could hold 2 guns at the same time and reload quickly. Cho didn't have the ability to do this. And this trained shooter, ensured that his victims were dead by shooting them 3 times. Apparently, Cho as well shot 3 times. Again, folks, you can't commit suicide by shooting yourself 3 times. Once in the head, twice in the chest. And don't forget, the shot in the head was in the rear of the head. As I mentioned yesterday, you never hear of people shooting themselves in the rear of the head. You commit suicide, you're going to go for what's easy, what's convenient. Shooting yourself in the rear of the head is it's almost impossible for most people to even reach behind there and get a good angle. It's just very awkward. And the bullet wound wasn't consistent with a shot being fired at close range. It was more consistent with one shot from a distance, in the head. So, obviously, just on that basis alone, this story crumbles like every other government story that we're fed. But I don't think they care that this story doesn't add up, because they know that most people are going to buy it. They're never going to look into it. They're never even going to think to question it, that there's any reason to question it, because after all, El Governmente said, why question El Governmente? They wouldn't lie to us. Oh, no, they never do. Anyway, there was actually no witness to the alleged suicide of Cho. That's another important point to bring out. This is all what we are told. Again, just like 9/11. People just go by what they're told. They were told that there were 19 hijackers. They were told that Flight 77 hit the Pentagon. They were told that Flight 93 crashed in Shanksville. Told this, told that. They were told that the buildings collapsed because of thermal expansion. That's got to be the biggest joke of all. Thermal expansion, my fat behind. My behind isn't fat, by the way, but anyway. So, moving on here. One witness to the killings said that the killer did not have Asian-looking eyes. This testimony, of course, was completely ignored. They only pay attention to testimonies, or put in the record testimonies that jive with the official story, just like the Kennedy assassination. No, there was no one behind the grassy knoll. I talked about Flight 93 a couple of weeks ago and how the FBI was telling witnesses, no, there was no other plane in the area. But, sir, we saw a military plane. Nope, you didn't see it. There was nothing else there. Sir, we did see it. It flew overhead. It was very close. No, it wasn't there. And so those stories never got written down. We only know about them because a couple local papers carried those stories, but it never made it into the national news. Oh, I don't know, America. When are you going to snap out of it? You should have snapped out of it a long time ago. When they pulled off the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. That should have been your wake-up call. I mean, they had been trying to pull off something like that for over 100 years. Going back to 1791, as a matter of fact, with the First Bank of the United States. And then 1816, or 1812, I should say, when they renewed the charter for the second bank of the, no, I had it right the first time. The first charter ran out in 1812. The second charter was renewed in 1816. Anyway, the first bank, the second bank of the United States, those were early attempts at a central bank in this country. You had people like Thomas Jefferson speaking out against it. Andrew Jackson spoke out against it. In fact, caught a couple bullets in the head because of it, but amazingly survived. They tried to kill him. They didn't succeed, but, he shut them down in 1836, the second bank of the United States. They tried it under Lincoln. Lincoln resisted him. We know what happened to him. They tried it under Garfield. Garfield resisted. We know what happened to him. They tried it under McKinley. McKinley resisted him, and we know what happened to him. Look at the long history here. It's obvious what was going on, and yet just a few short years later in 1913, they were at it again. This time they succeeded. The American public was snoozing right through that, and has been snoozing ever since. The Federal Reserve Act, was only the first step, but a very important step. That's how they were able to pull off all the other stuff that they pulled off. They had to be able to pick our pockets to finance all of their other escapades. But because we didn't wake up to that, because we didn't put a stop to that, we've gotten all these other fiascos. They sucked us into World War I, World War II, the fraudulence of the Cold War, all these bureaucracies in Washington that they've created. None of these things would have been possible without the Federal Reserve to create these huge, bloated budgets. Before the Federal Reserve, they were limited to how much they could spend because we were on the gold standard. They couldn't spend more than what they had in reserves. But now with the Federal Reserve in place, there's no limit. There's no limit whatsoever. And America, you've just been sleeping for too long. I just marvel, at the ignorance of people when you talk about things like this. 9/11 being inside job, Columbine, Virginia Tech. People just, you look at you like you got antennas sticking out of your head. But shame on them. Shame on them for not being aware of what's been going on in this country right in their face. It's not, hidden in a back room. This stuff is done right out in the open. And the problems with the official stories always are major, right? Like a dog just ready to bite your head off. You can't miss this stuff. But almost everybody does. It's unbelievable. Anyway, let's move on with our topic at hand here. Look at some more problems with the Virginia Tech shooting. There's no end to them. No one saw the killer's face. The whole time the shooting spree was going on, nobody saw his face. He was wearing a mask, eyewitnesses said. He was also said to be about 6 feet tall with a large build. Yet Cho was only 5 feet 8 inches tall and was not of a large build. So there you go. Was this Cho pulling off the shootings? Doesn't look like it now, does it? Nobody saw him. Nobody could positively identify him. And don't forget, at least one witness got a very close look at him and said he didn't have Asian-looking eyes. Okay? And we got a break coming in. Stick with us, folks. I'll get to some more major inconsistencies with this fraudulent story when we get back. All right, guys. We're already a half hour broadcast. I gotta get moving here if I want to finish up these notes. Well, if I don't, I'll finish them whenever. Probably Thursday, because tomorrow I got a guest for the full 2 hours. Anyway, the gun vendor where Cho had bought the guns described Cho simply as an Asian, but there were no security camera pictures taken of him. No evidence that it was actually him buying the guns. So there you go. How do you like that? How do you like that? We don't even know if Cho actually bought the guns. The killer had erased the code on the guns. The receipt for the purchase of the guns was found in the killer's bag, in Cho's bag. Isn't that interesting? What are the chances of the killer keeping the receipt for a month after the purchase, keeping it at all, let alone having it conveniently in his bag at the time of the killings? This sounds like planted evidence to me, folks. If enough care was taken to remove the code on the guns, it seems even more unlikely that the receipt would be kept, and certainly that it would be kept in the bag itself. Does that make sense? This is like the miraculous passport being found a block away from ground zero, later in the debris. Oh, that wasn't planted evidence now, was it? The entire plane was swallowed up when it struck the North Tower. The huge explosion, that whole plane was incinerated, and yet we're supposed to believe that a fragile piece of paper flew out and landed blocks away, intact, hardly even singed. You gotta be kidding. My personal favorite with 9/11 is the Muhammad Atta bag. I've mentioned this on previous broadcasts, but conveniently, of all the bags checked in on 9/11, it was the only one that didn't make its flight and was just waiting there for the FBI when they showed up later so they could go through it and then make claims later that they found this and that. Keep changing their story. Oh, by the way, did we mention we also found this and found that? Right after they found the bag, they published a list of all the items that were in it. And then almost 5 years later, they added something else to it. They said, oh, yeah, well, there was also a list of all the hijackers' names. That's where we got the hijackers' names from. When initially they said they got them from the passenger manifest list, but they weren't on the passenger manifest list. I mean, oh, man. Unless you've studied this stuff carefully, you can't even begin to imagine just how much you're being lied to. But, when you carefully watch events like this unfold over the years, you take notes, and then you consult those notes later when something else happens, you gawk with amazement that the public can buy this crap. Absolute amazement, because the lies are just through the roof. And they continue to tell the same kind of crappy lies and make the same bloomin' mistakes in their little psyops operations, and that people don't see this is just, it's astonishing. Anyway, none of the witnesses to the killings at Virginia Tech mentioned the killer wearing or carrying any bag of any kind. Now, isn't that a kick in the head? We're told that the gun purchase receipt was in his bag, but yet when he was going through the school, or whoever it was going through the school doing the shootings, this killer was not touting a bag at all, wasn't carrying one, didn't have one on his back. Do you see the problems with this story? Let's go on now to talk about the video that he allegedly sent, to NBC. It was not made by Cho, folks. Because of the editing job and the multiple camera angles, it keeps jumping from this angle to that angle. Even the New York Times pointed this out, that it didn't look like the video was made by Cho. Somebody else had to be shooting it for him. Did he even have time to do the editing? You know, when you're in a rush, you just kill some people. You don't want to take a chance that you're going to get caught. You're not going to be able to take the time to do editing and, fiddle with the camera, fuss with it, and change its angle from this angle to that. No. You're in a hurry. You want to get on to your next killing, right? And yet, this tape looks like it was made with some degree of care. There was editing done, and the camera angles, again, kept changing. It's obvious that this film wasn't even shot the same day. Or if it was, he got up very early in the morning and shot it before the killing spree even began. But there's other problems on the tape. Cho was not expressing hateful emotions to match the hateful words that he was speaking on the tape. He wasn't speaking with anger. He was kind of, he seemed almost emotionless. And, of course, he was reading off of a sheet. Was he coerced or perhaps threatened into doing this? Read from this sheet as we record you, or we're going to kill your family, whatever. Who knows? The guy did have mental problems. He was probably an easy target for something like this. But clearly, folks, he wasn't speaking out of anger or revenge. There was no emotion. You can go look at the videos for yourself. They're all over the internet. You don't see that anger in his voice matching the words that he's speaking. It was done very casually almost. Cho also claimed on the tape to be the victim of persecution at the school, but there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that he suffered any form of victimization, either at school or anywhere else. He acted like, finally you're going to get yours now for what you've done to me. There's no evidence that he was ever picked on or made fun of, nothing. Called names, absolutely no evidence whatsoever. All that going on is that incident in 2005, where he was stalking a couple girls, and then he was, in fact, I'm going to talk about that next year in my notes. As mentioned, Cho was referred to a mental health facility in 2005 over this, the stalking incident. A Virginia court described Cho as, quote, an imminent threat to himself and others and ordered him to seek mental treatment. However, documents obtained by ABC News show that Cho was released only one day after being committed, and that even though a physician at the facility agreed that Cho was mentally ill, he certified that he was, quote, not a threat to himself or others. So which is it? We've been told that, a court said he was a serious threat to himself and society, blah, blah, blah. But the physician who examined him at the mental health facility released him only a day later and said that he was not a threat to himself or others. Yes, he had mental problems, but he was not a threat. So you got to ask, was the state of Cho's mental health exaggerated so that he would fit the bill as the crazed madman who solely told off the Virginia Tech shootings? It certainly looks that way to me, folks. According to the police, the gun at the incident was automatic, and yet the pictures of him show him holding two handguns. They weren't automatics. According to the testimony of one student, Cho had no friends whatsoever. Yet a few days before the incident, he was with two other Americans. Who were they? according to the news and the tape allegedly sent by Cho to NBC, he committed this crime out of hate for rich people. But if this were true, he could have simply stuck with shooting students in the classrooms. So why did he go to the dormitory and shoot 2 students there who were not rich and affluent? Why single them out? Again, folks, it doesn't add up. These stories are designed for the gullible masses that don't think, that don't look at the lumps under the rug, that don't even notice the lumps at all. But when you do, in fact, notice those lumps and look under the rug, always these stories crumble to dust. It's just absolute nonsense. Why did Cho, after the first shooting, make the video, as I stated, and then walk around the school to send it to NBC, and then go to the second shooting? He seemed to not be in any hurry, worrying about being apprehended before he completed his mission, after which time he was supposedly planning to commit suicide. None of this stuff adds up. When Cho's body was found, his ID was present. So why is it that his identity was reported, or wasn't reported until later on? You know, his ID was right there on him. Why did it take so long? They should have known right away who he was. Anyway, lots more inconsistencies. I hope I got time to finish this up before the guest comes. If not, I'll pick it up on Thursday. Stick with us, folks. Be right back. All right, folks. Back on Truth Hertz Radio. Got a final segment here for this first hour, and then I'll be bringing my guest on, hopefully anyway. Here's another inconsistency. The photos sent to NBC do not even match Cho's face. The eyebrows, eyes, and face shape, for example, do not look like earlier pictures of Cho. It's not the same person, folks. Cho's body was found with the 28 dead bodies in the classroom. The only survivor of this massacre stated that the killer ran off after completing his rampage. Do you see the problem? The only survivor in the classroom that wasn't killed that morning, or afternoon by this time, whatever, almost afternoon, I guess it was around 10 or 11. But anyway, the only survivor of the second rampage said that the killer ran off, but yet Cho's body was found in the classroom with the other dead students. Come on. The classroom dormitory, hallways, school gate, gun shop, closed circuit TV footage, etc., were not shown to the public. Why? All of this information. No, this is, again, a classic PSYOPs job, folks. This is what happens. The FBI is there on the scene, seizing surveillance tapes. They're not collecting evidence to assist in their investigation. They're collecting evidence to destroy it, to hide what really went on. They always do. Anyway, eyewitness Matt Kazi stated that it was a full 2 to 3 hours after the shootings began that loudspeakers installed around the campus were used to warn students to stay indoors, and that a shooter was on the loose. What was going on here? He stated that it was a full 2 to 3 hours after the shootings began. Can you believe this? You know, this is like on 9/11, a voice being heard over the cell tower loudspeakers, telling everybody to remain calm, stay in your offices, everything's fine, when it was known that a second hijacked plane was heading toward New York. Unbelievable. It was known that a second plane was heading toward them, and they were told, remain calm, stay in your office. Remain calm, everybody. We want the maximum amount of deaths so we can get the maximum shock effect to sucker you to fight our wars and to give up your liberties when we pass things like the Patriot Act, okay? So please cooperate. We want as many of you to die as possible. You know, just like the Lusitania. You know, the German government was sending mercenaries to the dock there to warn people, you know, not to board. And yet the U.S. government was saying, oh, no, this is propaganda, war propaganda. Don't listen to the Germans. The German government had more compassion and concern about American citizens than the American government did. They wanted the maximum death toll. Anyway, how the killer was allowed so much time, folks, before any action was taken to stop him is absolutely baffling, especially considering the fact that the campus, according to Kazi, the same eyewitness, was crawling with police before the event even happened due to numerous bomb threats, that had been phoned in the previous week. One student, Jason Piat, told CNN, and I quote, "What happened today, this was ridiculous, and I'll say on the record, I'm pretty outraged that someone died in a shooting in a dorm at 7 o'clock in the morning, and the first email about it, no mention of locking down campus, no mention of canceling classes. They just mention that they're investigating a shooting 2 hours later at 9:22. That's pretty ridiculous. And meanwhile, while they're sending out the email, 22 more people got killed. Very ridiculous indeed. The shootings came 3 days after a bomb threat forced the cancellation of classes in 3 buildings. WDBJ in Roanoke had reported. Also, the 100,000 square foot Torgerson Hall was evacuated April 2nd after police received a written bomb threat, the Roanoke Times reported. On and on it goes, folks. Just one major problem after another. Initial reports suggested there were 2 shooters, but the story quickly changed to just one shooter, who later killed himself, as happens in almost all these cases, folks, or that he was shot by police. Once again, initial reports, it's like the Oklahoma City bombing. Initial reports stated, local reports, that there was more than one bomb. And there was. Got a show coming up on that sometime. But in the national news, nope, only one bomb. That's it. Eyewitness accounts describe police hiding behind trees and failing to pursue the killer while ordering the school to be placed on lockdown so that nobody could escape the carnage as the killer picked off his targets with seemingly little interruptions from police. This makes me think of the WTO protests in 1999 in Seattle, where police were told to stand down. People were ringing the police phones off the hook, and no responses were made. They didn't even answer the phones. People were having their windshields smashed, their front store windows broken, with batons. It turns out, this emerged later, and this was covered in the local press. It didn't make the national news, but the federal government told the police not to break ranks at the hotel where the guests were staying for the WTO meetings. In the meantime, they hired some black bloc thugs to infiltrate the legitimate peaceful protesters to make it look like they were rebel rousers. And so they were able, without any police intervention, to smash, property, destroy property. There were people in the local news, legitimate protesters, peaceful protesters, who were saying, we have nothing to do with these violent outrages. We're disgusted that these people are here. We're not associated with them at all. They were wearing black ski masks. It emerged that later they were awarded free government housing. They were street people. They were awarded free housing by HUD for cooperating and making the legitimate protesters look bad. Oh, this crap goes on all the time, folks. Anyway, on July 5th, 2007, the New York Times reported that Kenneth Feinberg, the lawyer whom John Ashcroft appointed to head up the federal program to compensate, i.e. bribe, family members of 9/11 victims, would also be overseeing the distribution of a $7 million fund donated to Virginia Tech for family members of the VA Tech shootings. Now, isn't that interesting? The same guy. I wonder if there was a condition for the receipt of this money, too, as there was for the 9/11 compensation fund. The condition was, don't sue anybody, the government or any security companies or airline companies involved in the 9/11 attacks. Promise us here on paper with your signature that you're not going to sue anybody, and we'll give you $1.8 million. Unfreaking believable. So I wonder if these family members of the victims of the VA tech shootings were also given conditions. Well, it appears so, because notice this. The New York Times went on to say, quote, Mr. Feinberg said he plans to disseminate a set of proposals about distributions to the families in mid-July. He will establish criteria for eligibility by the end of the month, and he plans to finish distributing money before Thanksgiving, he said. Well, there we go. This is the same, can I say it on air? This is the same bastard who came up with the criteria for family members of 9/11 victims to receive their compensation. Oh, don't sue anybody now, and we'll give you the money. You can bet. I don't know of any report that ever came out about what these stipulations were, but here's the New York Times stating that this same bastard lawyer had criteria for the family members to receive this money. I can guarantee you, folks, that criteria was the same with 9/11 compensation fund money. Keep your mouths shut. Don't question anything. Go along with the official story that we suckered the public into believing, and we'll give you your money. This is an outrage. Unbelievable. Oh, folks, can anybody say inside job? Can anybody say CIA PSYOPs operation? Oh, yeah. Langley isn't too far away now, is it, from VA Tech? All right, guys, short break. Hopefully my guest will be coming on the second hour. Stick with us. Be right back. All right, guys. The second hour of our broadcast here. I forgot to mention another very bizarre event occurred at Virginia Tech last year. Less than 2 years after the Cho incident, or what we were told was the Cho incident. Anyway, also at Virginia Tech on January 21st, 2009, Xin Yang was stabbed and beheaded by another Chinese student, a doctoral student at that, in a campus cafeteria. Very, very strange. Was this another PSYOPs operation? Perhaps we'll never know. If anybody has any information on that, by all means, send it to truthhertzradio@aol.com, spelling Hertz, Hertz. I'd like to know about it. I haven't been able to dig up anything on that. Not much was reported on it. In fact, it didn't get much fanfare at all. That's major news, especially where less than 2 years earlier, you had the big shootout there at Virginia Tech. That was squashed down. So, I don't know. Then, of course, it involved a knife, not a gun. Maybe that was a legitimate student going off the wire. I don't know. But just interesting that it was at the same school, less than 2 years later. Just bizarre stuff. Anyway, let's move on here to a different topic. I guess my guest, I sent him a confirmation email, as he asked me to do, but I don't see him calling in. And, I interviewed him before and never had a problem. So I'm assuming something major must have come up. He is a lawyer. He's probably got a lot of commitments, and something must have come up. I do apologize. I'll see if I can get him on again sometime, folks. This does happen, unfortunately, from time to time. With me lately, it seems to be quite a bit, but, it's nothing new. I've had this, I've seen this for years. Like I said, you're lucky if 60% of the time your guests show up. It's kind of a luck of the draw thing. Anyway, but yeah, William Pepper was supposed to be the guest. I'm sure he would have called in by now if that was going to be the case. So I'll go off onto another discussion here. Let's take a look at the number 33, which of course is, the highest degree in Scottish Rite Freemasonry. It's a very powerful number in the occult world. We see this number popping up all over the place. I was with a friend of mine just the other day. We took a ride up and spent the day up in Portland, Maine. Beautiful, beautiful city up there. Oceanside city. Anyway, we're on our way up, and right there on the highway, This truck, pulls up side of us. I look out, and it had 33 written on the side of it, on the back of it, and then we circled around it later into, the first lane to check, the other side, and sure enough, on that side it had the same, nothing else was written on it. But what was strange about it is, I'll get to that when we get back after break. Stick with us, folks. Okay, folks, back. As I mentioned before the break, let's take a look at the number 33. Before I launch into this, I just wanted to mention this truck. It was the weirdest thing. Couldn't really see the driver. Two windows were dark on either side. And he sped off pretty quick, so we couldn't pull ahead of him to see him from the front. I've never seen anything like it. It had just the number 33, but the first three was facing the right way. The other three was facing the opposite way. Just very bizarre. We did take a picture. Had a camera on us. Did snap a picture of it. Anyway, the number 33 pops up, folks, all over the place. Sometimes it's a little subtle. It's disguised, but it's everywhere. Not only the number itself, but, buildings that have 33 floors, or number 33, on a street, very important building, like usually banks, interestingly enough, or Masonic lodges. It allegedly represents selfless devotion to the spiritual progress of humankind. At least that's what we're told. Sure, it has other more sinister applications that we're not told about. The other two master numbers in Freemasonry, of course, are 11, standing for vision, we're told, and 22, vision with action. And they form the base of a two-dimensional pyramid, and added together equal 33, of course. Guidance to the world, the apex of the pyramid. On the reverse of the Masonically inspired Great Seal of the United States, of course, is the pyramid with the all-seeing eye of divine reason at its apex. Both in modern and ancient times, important buildings, cities, and other constructions have been erected on the 33rd parallel. I think I did a show. I did. I did a show not too long ago on how, death rows in this country and in other countries around the world, are in states or countries that the 33rd parallel passes through. A lot of assassinations of important dignitaries have occurred on the 33rd parallel. But anyway, let's take a look at some of these sites, beginning by looking at some odd coincidental incidences where the number 33 pops up outside of the 33rd parallel. Anyway, let's look at uses of this word in the Bible to start off with. We're told that King David ruled in Jerusalem for 33 years. We're told that Jacob had 33 sons and daughters. We're told that Christ was apparently crucified at the age of 33. That's what most put it at anyway. If you look at events in his life, the way the time factor works out, it appears that he was in fact 33 when he died. Let's look at some examples from Dante, the late 13th, early 14th century Italian poet. He ended Canto 33 of the Purgatorio, or the second section of his Divine Comedy, with these words: perfect, pure, and ready for the stars. Canto 33 of the Paradiso, or the third section, concludes with lines about the poet being turned, quote, as in a wheel, whose motion nothing jars, by the love that moves the sun and the other stars. Interesting correlation here with those two verses. So it's more than just a coincidence, folks, that the 33rd canto of each section concludes with parallel lines regarding these the celestial, the stars. It may indeed be the code from a lost ancient tradition that they're echoing. We know the Masons are big on that. How about in biology? There's 33 is the number of turns in a complete sequence of DNA. That's interesting. This number pops up in the natural world as well. How about in the elements? The 33rd element of the periodic table is arsenic. It's a brittle steel gray substance that is actively poisonous. The Greek root arsen means male, strong, or virile. About in ancient sites, many ancient sites around the world are on the 33rd parallel. So this might actually be some ancient, long-lost tradition, or at least long-lost to the general public. Masons probably know what it's all about. Let's look at some examples. The first one we'll look at is the metropolis of Phoenix, Arizona, located at 33 degrees 30 minutes latitude. This modern American city lies in a brown cloud of auto exhaust at the northern end of the Sonoran Desert. In essence, Phoenix is pervaded with an aura of the foreign and the bizarre. Few coastal tourists realize, however, that this was once the center of the ancient Hohokam culture. So there we go. It's just by chance that the Hohokam tribe had the epicenter of their culture located on the 33rd parallel. The largest Hohokam site, known as Snake Town, was located about 5 miles north of the exact 33rd degree line, while the ruins of the astronomical observatory called Casa Grande still rests about 5 miles south of the line. The Hohokam inhabited the Valley of the Sun perhaps as early as 300 BC, about the time of Alexander the Great, and the Ptolemaic dynasties in Egypt, and built one of the world's most extensive irrigation systems, as did the Maya as well. I wonder who copied from who there, or for that matter, where they even got it from. The Maya and the Hohokam, where did they get this from? Anyway, these ancient American Indians created an estimated total of 50 miles of canals to irrigate over 25,000 acres in the Phoenix Basin, all constructed with mere digging sticks, stone implements, and woven carrying baskets, or at least that's what we're told. Who knows? They had a more advanced technology than that. Anyway, guys, we'll pick up there when we get back. Lots of ancient cities located on the 33rd parallel. Really strange stuff. All right, folks. Hertz Radio. By the way, if anybody wants the transcripts for this or any other topic I've covered, you can just email me at truthhertzradio@AOL.com, spelled Hertz, H-E-R-T-Z. And if you get any ideas or information you want to share, that I can use on the air, always looking for new ideas, send it away. I'd like to get it. Anyway, we just looked at Phoenix, Arizona, the site of the ancient Hohokam epicenter of their culture, located on the 33rd degree parallel. Let's look at another one. At latitude 33 degrees 19 minutes was located the primary Phoenician seaport of Tyre, now called Sur, almost 50 miles south of Beirut. It dated back as early as 5000 BC. Tyre was renowned for its purple dye obtained from snails of the genus Murex. that's where they got the name from. Phoenician means purple, or the purple people. The Phoenicians were a very competent seafaring culture, very big on trade. They extended all over the Mediterranean, up and down the west coast of Europe, to India, China, and of course, believe it or not, the Americas as well. I've got some shows coming up at a later time on that. Absolutely fascinating. The evidence of Phoenician trading over here is everywhere present. They found Phoenician inscriptions down in South America, in Brazil, for example, in Peru, up in Maine, off the coast of Maine, was a small island where they actually found some Ogam inscription that says Phoenician trading port. So the evidence is it's overwhelming. For those that have an open mind, open enough to take a look at it, the evidence is it abounds. But again, mainstream academia, like so many other things, hides the truth from people. Also near the 33rd parallel is Byblos, a bit farther north of Tyre, at a latitude of 34 degrees 08 minutes, so a little bit off, but close enough. Major cities, ancient cities, either right on the 33rd parallel or very close to it. A bit further east, at nearly the same latitude, is Baalbek in modern-day Lebanon. Baalbek contains the largest, most heaviest stones of human construction in the world. One block measuring 80 feet long and weighing 1,100 tons is among the largest there. Just absolutely phenomenal. Think about it. 80-foot long stone block, 1,100 tons. How did they move that sucker? It's anybody's guess, but they did do it. Anyway, let's move on, talk about Babylon at 33 degrees 20 minutes, which of course is located in modern Baghdad in Iraq. God knows what's left of it now, of course, with the Iraq War of 2003. They've devastated a lot of the ruins of Baghdad. They actually used a lot of the ruins of Babylon, I should say. They actually used the site as a military base, and as far as I know, they still are using it. But during shock and awe, the U.S. had a lot of their munitions stationed there. A lot of their troops were posted there. And a lot of the ruins there were destroyed. And that's very interesting because during the 91 Gulf War, Daddy Bush accused Saddam of hiding weapons in the ruins, figuring that the claim was that was a sleazy tactic because they figured that we wouldn't use that as a target. We wouldn't destroy this priceless treasure. And yet here we were in 2003 doing that very thing ourselves. Unbelievable. How disgusting, folks. But hey, why not? They looted the Baghdad Museum before that, so, why not destroy the actual ruins of the city when they looted the museum? Disgusting bunch of pigs. Anyway, this ancient capital of Mesopotamia, on the banks of the Euphrates River, was once the largest city in the world, encompassing over 2,500 acres. It's pretty enormous. The construction of Babylon began during the 23rd century BC and included the Temple of Marduk, known as Sagila, as well as the legendary Tower of Babel. So, there you go, another famous, another very important city, ancient city, located on, or at least near, the 33rd parallel. Anyway, let's move on to China here. There's a fabulous white pyramid located about 60 miles southwest of Xi'an, or Sian, in the Qinling-Shan Mountains of China's Shenxi province. So here again, we see another example. A lot of people don't realize it, but there's many pyramids in ancient China. Google that. You can see pictures of them, quite different looking from, you know, the Egyptian pyramids or the Mexican pyramids, but pyramids nonetheless. In fact, there's really no major part of the world that doesn't have pyramids, ancient pyramids. Makes you wonder what was up with that. This was a common feature in all cultures. A lot of them shared, you know, similarities, but there were also some things that were quite different about them from one culture to the next. But again, pyramids. Almost always they had 4 sides. Sometimes they were stepped pyramids, sometimes they were flat-sided, sometimes they had temples on top, other times they had no temple at all. But nevertheless, you know, they all had pretty much 4 sides. In fact, I don't know of any pyramids that had any less or more than that. They're 4-sided. There's a pyramid on Mars that has 5 sides. That's another story. That's for another show. But, yeah, all the ancient cultures had 4-sided pyramids. What was up with that? Some were used as burials. Maya, for example, you know, Pakal. You know, that was an obvious truth. They found the king's body right there in the Temple of the Inscriptions. And, you know, it's rumored that that was the case in Egypt, although there really hasn't ever been. In fact, there hasn't ever been any mummies found in a pyramid. The argument is, oh, well, they were looted in ancient times. Well, that might be, but, you know, when thieves broke in, they weren't going after mummies. They were going after treasures. They would have left the mummies. We don't have, not only have we never found any burials in the Egyptian pyramids, but we don't have any record of any mummies ever being found. So, who knows? Who knows what the real function was? There's a lot of interesting theories, and on future shows I'll delve into that. But anyway, so here's another interesting ancient site on the 33rd parallel. We find it now in ancient China. This was common around the world. Okay, guys, have a short break. Stick with us. Be right back. All right, guys. So we've talked about some ancient cities on the 33rd parallel. Let's look at some other bizarre appearances of this number. Highway 33. 1,500 miles east of Phoenix, along latitude 33 north, lies the Moundville site, lying exactly on the line. This city, constructed by the Mississippian culture along the Black Warrior River in central Alabama, which was inhabited from 1000 through 1450 AD, had a population of over 1,000, second in size and complexity to ancient Cahokia in Illinois. The 26 earthen platform mounds arranged in a circular pattern are similar in structure to those in Arizona's Valley of the Sun, with temples and residences for the elite priesthood, likewise built on top. One of the larger mounds is a ramped pyramid that rises to a height of 58 feet. So this is quite a significant site as well, another ancient site. Let's see here. Oh, I guess I have a bunch of other ancient cities listed here. I thought I was done looking at ancient cities on the 33rd parallel, but approximately 10 miles southwest of the town of Lake Providence, 32 degrees 49 minutes on the Mississippi River floodplain in northeastern Louisiana, is Poverty Point State Historic Site, another one associated with the 33rd parallel. You know what, folks? It took me all this time to realize, I guess, I thought the show I was sharing with you was bizarre occurrences of the number 33, but it's not. It's this whole show is ancient sites on the 33rd parallel. Don't mind me, I'm half asleep today. I actually picked this at the last minute, realizing my guest wasn't going to show up, and I thought it was another show. I do have a show that deals just with the number 33 and all of the strange occurrences of it. But no, this one is just ancient sites. But that's cool. This is a fascinating subject. And so you got to wonder, why so many sites right on the 33rd parallel? So many ancient sites. You know, what was up with this? Were the ancients on to something here? Did they hold the number 33 in high esteem? You'd also have to ask, of course, you know, what my mind just went blank on you folks. I'm having a senior moment here. Anyway, you know, what was the significance that they saw in it? And what is the significance that Freemasonry now sees in it? Is it the same thing? You know, does Freemasonry know something that they're not sharing with us? Of course, we know there's a whole lot of things Freemasonry knows they're not sharing with us. And all the other secret societies like Skull and Bones. You know, when John Kerry was asked by Tim Russer, I forget the exact question now, it was pertaining to the upcoming, you know, election and the debates. And anyway, he brought up Skull and Bones, I guess. And he says, can you tell us about it? What's the matter? Is it a secret? And then he laughs and he says, oh, well, there's a whole lot of secrets, Tim. You know, so there you go. You know, ultimately, they're probably the ones that looted the Baghdad Museum. You know, the treasures are probably in the hands of Skull and Bones members. And going back, you know, to the World War II, when they bombed in Berlin, the treasures of the Berlin Museum disappeared at that time. Of course, they told us that, oh, they were destroyed during the bombing. Hogwash. Somebody walked away with those treasures, folks. In fact, some of them have surfaced in more recent years. The famous Amber Room that was in St. Petersburg from, you know, Peter the Great, from his palace there. There was one room that was almost completely made of amber. Very beautiful, exquisite designs. Some of the panels have recently, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, they turned up at some auction or whatever. Some private collector was auctioning them off, I guess. So, I mean, you know, so much for the treasures being destroyed. We know they weren't destroyed. Somebody stole them. Somebody, you know, high profile, of course, i.e., was a government operation. They do this all the time, folks. They use war as a cover to loot treasures from these museums. The treasures of Troy, of course, were in that collection. You know, those have disappeared. They weren't destroyed. They weren't bombed. They're somewhere. I'm sure our little friends in the secret societies know exactly where they are. Anyway, let's go on to some more ancient sites here on the 33rd, or at least near the 33rd parallel. Even closer to the magic number 33, though not as impressive or as old, are the Winterville Mounds, located 6 miles north of the town of Greenville in west central Mississippi, 33 degrees, 25 minutes. Inhabited between 1000 AD and 1450 AD, the site includes 23 flat-top mounds, with the main temple mound rising 55 feet. About 4 miles south of Cartersville in northwestern Georgia, 34 degrees 11 minutes, is Estoa Indian Mound State Park. White settlers understood the Creek and the later Cherokee to call this site Hightower, possibly for Itawa or Itawa City. The name Itawa may also be a corruption of this word, this Native American word. Anyway, it's interesting to note that the Hopi word for the sun deity is Tawa. Another connection, a linguistic connection. Itawa was first inhabited in 950 AD and contains 3 major mounds. One is a ceremonial mound 63 feet in height, and another is a burial mound in which were found numerous artifacts, including copper ear ornaments, stone effigies, and seashells, which were, a form of money, along with obsidian obsidian artifacts and grizzly bear teeth from the Rocky Mountains, quite a distance away. Obviously, the ancient Native Americans had an extensive trade network. And here you go with copper. Copper was pretty rare among the Native Americans, even though it was abundant in this country, especially in the Great Lakes regions. Kind of getting sidetracked here, but this is interesting. My uncle, actually, he's a second cousin. I call him uncle, because he's so much older than me. Since I was a kid, I called him uncle. But anyway, has a place down in Connecticut near Hartford. He's got quite a few acres there, and he discovered years ago when he first moved there, he was digging a garden, he discovered an Indian burial mound. What he thought was a hill. He's putting a garden up on top of this hill. It turns out to be a big burial mound. Anyways, he had some digs done there, and they found copper ingots in the mound that they traced back to the mines in Michigan by the Great Lakes. Lake Superior particularly. So there you go, folks. There was this extensive trade network. Copper all the way from Michigan made it out to Connecticut in about 2000 BC. That's where when they dated this to, 4,000 years old. But again, copper was pretty rare among the natives. They had a few trinkets were found here and there, but not enough, anywhere near enough to account for the millions of pounds of copper that were removed in ancient times. I mentioned this in a previous broadcast. Huge copper mines have been found all around the Great Lakes region, dating back, 3,000-4,000 years ago, 5,000 even. Who was mining this copper, and where did it go? Well, as I mentioned before, they found some of these ingots in the shape of ox hides, which was a very common way to trade copper during the Bronze Age in Europe. We found Ogham and other European writings in the area of these copper mines. We've also found them all the way out here to New England. I mentioned the Phoenician trading port written in Ogham script up in off the coast of Maine. So, plenty of evidence, folks, for ancient old world cultures having reached the Americas. All right, guys, short break. Stick with us. Be right back. All right, guys, for our final segment here. The whole reason I just went off on that tangent is, we've been talking about mounds, ancient mound cities located in the 33rd parallel. The mound cultures, folks, or I should say the mound culture. I'm trying to remember now the name that they give them collectively. Mound builders anyway. Going back to the woodland period, these were not Native Americans, at least not for the most part. Most of the mound builders were actually of a very large stature. The skeletons that they dug out of these mounds are, anywhere from 7 to 9 feet tall, and some of them even taller than that. And they're of European stock. Some of them have been preserved quite well, and they have reddish-colored hair, indicating they were probably Celtic or, Norse or whatever, from the Scandinavian region of Europe. But they weren't Native American. In fact, many Native American tribes state that, that these were not our ancestors. They came from across the Great Sea to the east, i.e. the Atlantic. So, there's even more evidence there. And in some of these mounds, they've actually exhumed ancient Old World writings, tablets with Old World writings on them. So, the evidence of this is overwhelming. Like I said, I've got whole shows that I'll be doing on this, talking about this subject. Evidence of the Babylonians here, the Sumerians, the Greeks, the Romans, you name it. But once again, you're laughed at if you talk about this stuff. The halls of learning, the great halls of academia, will poke fun at you and say you don't know what you're talking about. It's unbelievable. By the way, isn't that just the most incredibly childish tactic? Isn't it quite obvious what we're dealing with here? These are supposed to be respectable scientists, and they will literally, like kindergartners, who get caught doing something naughty in school, by another student, to discredit what the other student who witnessed them doing this is saying about them. They'll just make fun of them and try to, make themselves look innocent. We see this in our respected halls of learning. They literally will poke fun of you. They'll attack you in the prestigious journals, but they won't meet you head on and debate with you. They won't address the evidence. They'll just say, "Oh, it's a forgery." And yet evidence is overwhelming. A lot of the evidence is actually in major museums that shows contact. The Smithsonian has a lot of this stuff. The famous Bat Creek stone, this was exhumed from a mound in Tennessee. And for the longest time, nobody recognized it for what it was. It was being displayed at the Smithsonian upside down. One day, I think his name was Cyrus Gordon or Cyrus Vance or whatever. Yeah, Cyrus Gordon, I think it was. He was in the Smithsonian, and, he had access. He was a linguistic professor, a master of, ancient languages. He helped to crack a lot of the ancient Mayan glyphs. What little we know about them today is mostly because of him. Anyway, he had access, to these artifacts, so he opened the case up, and he tipped the Bat Creek stone upside down, and he realized, son of a gun, this is Hebrew. It's ancient Hebrew, and he translated it. So there you go. Major prestigious museums have a lot of these artifacts. Sometimes they don't know what they are. Other times, they'll suppress it, have it in a back room somewhere. But, it gets me that it's even admitted that the Norse were here long before Columbus. 500 years, in fact, before him. That's admitted. And yet they still suppress this. They don't talk about it. It's not, for the most part, it's not even in the textbooks. Anyway, let's look at some other ancient sites on the 33rd parallel. Closer to the home of the Hohokam, on the western side of the Colorado River, are located a number of geoglyphs, also called intaglios. These figures formed in the desert by removal of darker pebbles, kind of like what you have down in, the Nazca Desert, those carvings there in the desert. You remove the pebbles and it reveals a lighter undersurface. There's sometimes hundreds of feet in length. Anyway, a lot of people don't realize we got the same thing over in Colorado. Was it the same culture that created the desert drawings in the Nazca Plain in Peru? Who knows? Anyway, this is also at 33 degrees 40 minutes latitude. And, I'm skipping through a lot of these notes. We just don't have the time here. But once again, anybody wants to read through this, I've got tons of information about this culture here, possible connections with the Nazca drawings. Just request the transcripts. I'll send them to you. Let's see. Midway on Spirit Road between the Sacred Mountain of the North and the mouth of the Colorado River are some more glyphs, 33 degrees, right at 33rd parallel. Also on this line is the Three Rivers Petroglyph site, located on the western base of the Sacramento Mountains, 18 miles west of Ruidoso, New Mexico, 33 degrees 19 minutes. So another site on the 33rd parallel. And again, there's a lot of other information here on that site. I'm not going to take the time, don't have the time. Near Gila Bend, Arizona, about 62 miles west of Snake Town, is Painted Rocks State Park, which has thousands of petroglyphs of similar designs, not actually painted, but pecked into the boulders. Again, folks, the 33rd parallel site. There's a fascinating site also in the general vicinity of Phoenix called Circle Stone Observatory, 33 degrees, 28 minutes. Why are all these significant sites on the 33rd parallel? And again, is this why so many important Masonic sites and events have occurred on the 33rd parallel in modern times? By the way, the site I just mentioned incorporates the golden ratio, which is 1 to 1.618. I've got several shows coming up on that sometime. That's fascinating. The golden ratio, look that up. How it pops up all over the place in art, in music, in ancient sites, but also, interestingly enough, in the natural world. Let me just whet your appetite for that by giving you one example. Interestingly enough, the bones in the hand, if you pick any finger at random, let's say your middle finger, and you look at the first digit, which really is inside the palm of your hand, it's 1.618 times the length as the second digit in that finger. And then that one is 1.618 times the length of the next digit in that finger. And then, of course, that's 1.618 times the length of the final digit. You can do that with all your fingers. It's the same. Not only that, but the length of your arm. If you go from, let's see, I got to get this right. If you go from the tip of your middle finger to your wrist, and then from your wrist to your elbow, the wrist to your elbow is 1.618 times the length as from your wrist to the tip of your middle finger. And likewise, from your shoulder to your elbow, and then from your elbow to your wrist is 1.618 times the length as the upper part of your arm to your elbow, from your elbow to your shoulder. We see this all over the place. I just threw that out there as one example. There's many more. I've got a whole show on it, so I won't go into it in any more detail now, but this is fascinating stuff. You know, things that make you go, most people don't even think about this, don't even know about it, don't even seem to care. But this stuff fascinates me, but why is that? Anyway, guys, I had a few more things to cover here, some other sites on the 33rd parallel, don't have time. But, yeah, request the notes, you can take a look at it for yourself, interesting stuff. All right, guys, that's it for today. I do have a guest. I'm going to make darn sure that I confirm it to make sure that they're on for tomorrow, so we'll catch you then. I'll leave it a surprise. And exploiting them to the hilt. All right, guys, short break. Stick with us. We'll be right back talking about the Virginia Tech fraudulent PSYOP shootings. Smoke in the hallways. The CIA's at it again. Virginia Tech, guys, another flippin' fraud. It's not a question of which tragic events have government fingerprints on them. It's a question of which ones don't have government fingerprints on them. In fact, I have a list here of all the major travesties that have occurred in this country's history that have not had the government's fingerprints on them. You want to hear it? Here it is. And that's it. I hope you wrote that down. Those are all of the instances tragic instances that have occurred that didn't have government fingerprints on them. Anyway, before I launch into that, I just wanted to mention I'm going to be talking about Virginia Tech Part 2, the first hour. That should be enough time to finish up these notes. And then the second hour, I'm going to be having a guest if the moon is lined up with Venus and Sagittarius. You just never know. I'm assuming my guest is going to show up, but who knows? No, he's a respectable guy. If he doesn't, it's because something major came up. It's William Pepper. Those of you that aren't familiar with him, he's an interesting individual. He's had he's written some great books, had some interesting experiences. He serves currently as Sirhan's lawyer, the alleged, and I do mean alleged, assassin of RFK. He's written a book. All right, guys. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I hope the weather's nice wherever you're at. Sure isn't up here in New England. I understand Obama today issued sections of New England as national disaster areas. The flooding is already starting in some areas, and it's going to continue to do this up until at least Friday. Friday's supposed to be the next non-rain day that we have, so I'm sure the bankster boys are rubbing their hands together with glee as the billions of federal dollars pour in, and they reap tremendous profits. Unbelievable. Anyway, and this is on top of flooding that we already had, like, what, a week and a half ago? We had like 4 or 5 days straight. Not to mention last year. Oh, this is deja vu. Last June, just this past June, it rained like 6 weeks straight. The whole month of June, literally, non-stop, every single day. I forgot what color the sky was. It rained the whole month of June and 2 weeks into July. It was just phenomenal. This is not normal weather. Anyway, I got a good show lined up for you today. I'm going to pick up with part 2 of what I started yesterday, talking about the Virginia Tech shootings. And really, you know, this needs to be viewed in light of what I discussed last week about Columbine. You know, once you see this pattern, folks, there's just no question what we're dealing with here. Columbine for hours on end. In that case, the shooting continued long after the time, several hours after the time, according to the official story, that Klebold and Harris had shot themselves. Now, how's that possible? Boy, you talk about coming back from the dead. These ghosts were able to still fire their guns, I guess. That's amazing. Wow. But anyway, you know, you got to wonder, just on that basis alone, how is this official story possible? How are we supposed to believe it when the shootings go on for hours on end? How was he able, you know, how was he able to do this? And how were Klebold and Harris able to do what they did? Even if they weren't, you know, supposedly shot at 12:10 and the shootings went on until almost 4 o'clock that afternoon, even if they were still alive all that time, how could they have pulled it off without police intervention? It's just incredible. SWAT teams swarming the place. But as it turns out, that's not the only problem. There are many, many, many more problems with the official story, both of Columbine and Virginia Tech. But again, we already looked at the Columbine thing last week. Now we want to look at some more of these problems with Virginia Tech. But already I hope you can see, based on what I said yesterday, that it's just not possible. But with the evidence we're going to be looking at now, I think you're going to agree with me that Cho either didn't do any of the shootings, or he was not the only perpetrator of, of this travesty. There were others involved. But I have good reason to believe, folks, that he wasn't even involved at all. He was set up as the patsy. Mine was a complete fraud. We were lied to about everything that happened there. It was a total psyops. And when you see the pattern at Virginia Tech, the same exact pattern, lo and behold, it's just business as usual. And that's been the case with a great many other school shootings, not only around this country, but in fact around the world. There was one in Scotland a few years back. Canada has had their share. And some people say, oh, that's the copycat syndrome. Well, yeah, it is. All the intelligence agencies around the world come out of the woodwork and say, hey, it's working great for them. Let's try it over here, too. You know, the same thing with the fake terror attacks, the fake terror alerts. Remember, what was his name? John Howard, former Australian Prime Minister, saw how well the fake orange alerts were working over here. He pulled the same thing over there in Australia. I think it was November of 2004 or 2005. I forget what year it was now, but there was a sleazy piece of so-called anti-terror legislation that Pretty Boy Howard was trying to get passed through Parliament. It wasn't flying. So, surprise of all surprises, the next day the little scoundrel issues a terror alert. And, of course, in wake of the terror alert, Parliament voted the piece of legislation in. And then later when asked, what's this orange alert, or not orange alert, but, terror alert, what's this terror alert based upon? And he says, oh, I can't go into the details. It's a matter of national security. But don't worry, it's from highly credible sources. Unbelievable. So, it's a copycat syndrome. They did the same thing here, folks. Scaring us with phony orange alerts, on the assassination of Martin Luther King, implicating, of course, the FBI, the CIA, in that hit. He's currently involved in an investigation, or should I say, efforts of a prosecution of George W. and his criminal cabal, being launched out of Spain. He's involved in that. We're going to be talking about those and other issues. Who knows where that conversation will lead, but it'll be interesting. So I'm anticipating he's going to be calling in the second hour. Really nice guy, though. I've interviewed him before. There's some interesting information. Anyway, but now let's pick up with part 2 of yesterday's discussion. Yesterday I kind of laid the groundwork, already dropped some hints of stuff I was going to be covering today, but basically what I covered yesterday was just pretty much the official story, what we were told about what happened, which already doesn't add up. We had shooting a couple kids in a dorm early in the morning, and then, a couple hours go by, and then he goes into part 2 of his shooting spree. During that 2-hour interval, we're told that, he filmed himself, took some pictures of himself, and then he mailed them to NBC News to be aired later. And all this time, nothing was done to stop him. It's just unbelievable. It's the same thing with Columbine, of course. We had Klebold and Harris, the only 2 shooters, whatever, going on.